My apartment looks out onto an old, decrepit building. It's been empty for as long as I can remember, half its windows shattered, the brick crumbling away. I've always found it a bit unsettling, but it was just part of the view. Until one night, I was getting ready for bed, pulling the curtains shut, when I saw something that made me freeze. In one of the broken window frames directly across from mine, a figure was standing. It was a woman. She had long, dark hair that fell over a pale, blank face. She was perfectly still, just there. For a moment, I thought it must be a mannequin left behind, a strange prank or something. But then, she blinked. A slow, deliberate closing and opening of her eyes. And she was staring right at me. A shiver ran down my spine, cold and sharp. I stumbled back from my window, my heart hammering against my ribs. Was I seeing things? I must be. Exhaustion plays tricks on the mind. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts, and cautiously peeked back out. She was gone. The window was empty again, just a dark, gaping hole in the ruined building. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was just tired. I forced myself to forget it, to rationalize it away. But the next night, she was back. The same window, the same chilling stillness, the same empty, penetrating stare. She hadn't moved an inch from where she'd stood before. My rational mind was screaming that this was impossible, but my eyes were telling me a different story. This time, I knew I wasn't imagining it. She was real, but what was she, and what did she want? A strange kind of courage, or maybe just morbid curiosity, took hold of me. I had to know. I had to see if she would react. So, I decided to test it. My hand felt heavy as I lifted it. Slowly, deliberately, I gave a small wave. A simple, neighborly gesture that felt utterly absurd in the circumstances. I held my breath, my eyes locked on her, waiting. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. She remained as still as a statue. I was about to drop my hand, ready to dismiss the whole thing as a delusion, when her arm moved. But it didn't move like a person's arm. It jerked up, a violent, unnatural motion, bending at an angle that looked completely wrong, like her bones had snapped and were being pulled by invisible strings. It was a grotesque parody of my wave. I let out a yelp and slammed my curtains shut, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the fabric. That night, sleep was a distant fantasy. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren, sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the sight of that horrifying, broken wave. And then, at exactly 3:03 a.m., I heard it. A soft tapping on my window. Tap, tap, tap. It was gentle at first, almost like rain. But then it grew louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. Someone, or something, was right outside. My blood ran cold. The abandoned building was across the street. There was no fire escape, no ledge, no way for anyone to be at my window. But the tapping continued, demanding my attention. Against my better judgment, fueled by a terror that had looped back around into a strange, desperate need to know, I got out of bed. My legs felt like lead as I walked to the window. With a trembling hand, I pulled the curtains aside. She was there, right there, on my side of the glass. Her pale face was inches from mine, her dark hair swirling as if in a phantom wind. But what made my stomach drop, what made the air leave my lungs in a silent scream, was what I saw behind her. There was no building across the street. No broken windows, no crumbling brick. Just an endless, starless void. There was nothing, just her. Her mouth began to move, stretching and contorting, as if she was trying to form words, but no sound came out. It was a silent, desperate plea. Then, with that same slow, unnatural grace, she lifted a single, long finger and pointed. Not at me, but behind me, into my apartment. I spun around, my heart seizing in my chest, expecting to see some new horror. But there was nothing there. Just my familiar living room, cast in the dim glow of the streetlights filtering through the window. It was empty. Confused, I turned back to the window. She was gone. The void was gone. And across the street, the old abandoned building stood just as it always had, dark and silent. Now, every night, the tapping returns. Always at 3:03 a.m. Tap, tap, tap. But I don't open the curtains anymore. I just lie in bed, rigid with fear, listening to it, waiting for the sun to rise. I'm too scared to look. I'm terrified I'll see her standing there again. And I'm even more terrified of what I might see if I turn around.
When I was 10, I had this strange habit of sleeping with my legs pulled up tight against my chest, almost in a ball. I couldn't stand the thought of my feet dangling off the edge of the mattress. I was terrified of the space under my bed. I know, it sounds like a typical childhood fear, the kind every kid has at some point. The boogeyman, the monster in the closet, the creature under the bed. But for me, it felt different. It felt real. It all started because of my older brother, Mark. He was the kind of brother who loved to tell scary stories, especially right before bed. One night, he leaned in close, his face pale in the dim glow of the hallway light, and told me a story that would stick with me forever. He said something lived under his bed, something that whispered to him every single night, in a small, trembling voice. He said it sounded like a lost child, and it would ask the same question over and over. Of course, I didn't believe him. I thought he was just trying to scare me, like he always did. I laughed it off, called him a liar, and went to bed feeling smug. I was 10, after all. Too old for monster stories. Or so I thought. I rolled over, pulled my covers up to my chin, and drifted off to sleep, feeling safe and sound in my own room. That sense of security didn't last long. A few nights later, I found out just how wrong I was. It was late, probably around 2 in the morning, the kind of late where the whole house is silent, and every little creak of the floorboards sounds like a gunshot. The moon was casting long, eerie shadows across my bedroom floor. I was in that hazy state right between being awake and being asleep, when you're not quite conscious, but you're not dreaming either. The room was absolutely still. My breathing was slow and even. And then I heard it. A soft, faint sound coming from right beneath me. From under my bed, it was a whisper, so quiet at first that I thought I might have imagined it. But then it came again, a little clearer this time. A small, shaky voice. "Are you awake?" I froze. Every muscle in my body went rigid. I stopped breathing. It was impossible. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was the house settling. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was just a dream. But it sounded so real, so close. My heart started to pound in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. It was so loud I was sure whatever was under my bed could hear it. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, paralyzed by fear, listening to the silence. After a few moments of nothing, I slowly let out the breath I'd been holding. I tried to tell myself I was being ridiculous. It was just my imagination, fueled by my brother's stupid story. But the silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the whisper itself. It was heavy, expectant, like something was waiting. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I managed to make a sound. It came out as a barely audible squeak. I cleared my throat and tried again, my voice trembling. "Who's there?" The response came immediately, as if it had been waiting for me to ask. The same small, cold voice, but this time it was laced with a desperate, chilling plea. "I'm cold. Can I come up?" That was it. That was the moment my childhood fear turned into pure, undiluted terror. I didn't scream. I didn't even think. My body moved on its own. In one single, panicked motion, I threw the covers off, leaped out of bed, and scrambled across the room to the light switch. I slapped my hand against the wall until I found it and flicked it on, flooding the room with harsh, bright light. I stood there, panting, my back pressed against the wall, my eyes darting around the room. Nothing. Everything was exactly as it should be. My desk was cluttered with books. My clothes were in a pile on the chair. My posters were still on the walls. I cautiously approached the bed, my heart still hammering. I dropped to my knees and peered into the darkness underneath. Dust bunnies, a lost sock, an old comic book. Nothing else. There was no one there. A wave of relief washed over me, so intense it made my knees weak. I laughed, A shaky, nervous sound. It was all in my head. A nightmare. That's all it was. I had worked myself up over nothing. I stood up, feeling a little foolish, and went to fix my blankets, which I'd kicked onto the floor in my panic. As I picked up my comforter, which was hanging halfway off the side of the bed, I saw it, and the relief I had just felt vanished, replaced by a cold, sickening dread that crawled up my spine. Imprinted in the soft fabric of the blanket, right where it had been dangling near the floor, were handprints, not smudges or stains. Clear, distinct handprints. They were small, too small to be an adult's. They looked like the handprints of a child who had been gripping the blanket, pulling on it from underneath the bed. I dropped the blanket as if it were on fire. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat on the chair in the corner of my room with the lights on, staring at the bed, until the sun came up. I watched the shadows retreat and listened to the familiar morning sounds of my family waking up, but the fear didn't go away. The next morning, I found my brother in the kitchen, eating cereal. I looked terrible. My eyes were bloodshot, and I was pale. He took one look at me and knew something was wrong. I sat down across from him and, in a hushed voice, told him everything. About the whisper, the question, the cold, and the handprints on the blanket. I expected him to laugh, to call me a baby, or to gloat that his story had scared me, but he didn't. He just put his spoon down and stared at me, his expression completely serious. There was a look in his eyes I'd never seen before. It was fear. The same fear I was feeling. He was silent for a long time. Then, he leaned forward and spoke in a low, grim voice. I stopped answering it years ago, he said. When you hear it, you have to pretend you're asleep. You can't move. You can't make a sound. If you talk to it, if you let it know, you can hear it. It comes back. Every night. And he was right, because that night, as I lay in bed with the lights on, huddled under the covers, it returned. Right on cue, around 2 a.m., the whisper floated up from the darkness beneath me. Are you awake? I did what my brother told me. I shut my eyes tight, held my breath, and stayed perfectly still. I didn't answer, but it knew. It knew I was awake. It knew I was listening. Every night after that, the voice returned, punctual, persistent, for weeks, for months, for years. And each time, I would lie there, feigning sleep, my body rigid with terror, listening to that same, lonely question. But things have changed. I'm not a kid anymore. I don't live in that house. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, in the dead of night, I can still hear it. The memory of that voice is burned into my mind. And the most terrifying part, the last time I was back in my old room, I heard it again. But this time was different. It wasn't a small, trembling whisper anymore. It was louder, angrier. It wasn't asking a question. It was making a demand. And now, it whispers louder. It's not asking if I'm awake. It's telling me it knows I am. And it's still cold. And it still wants to come up.
My grandmother's house was a patchwork of memories and forgotten things. Every corner had a story, but none was stranger than the guest room. It was a cozy little room, filled with antique furniture and the faint scent of lavender and mothballs. But it had one peculiar feature: the door. The door to that guest room never fully stayed shut. Could push it closed with all your might, hear the latch click into place, but a few moments later, it would drift open again, just a crack. It was as if the room itself refused to be sealed off, always wanting a sliver of the hallway to peek through. Grandma always joked about it, saying the old house had settled unevenly, or that the humidity made the wood swell. As a kid, I didn't think much of it. In fact, I kind of liked it. During summer vacations, that room became my sanctuary, especially during the big thunderstorms that would roll in over the hills. The sound of rain drumming on the roof and the distant rumble of thunder made me feel safe and snug under the heavy quilt on the bed. Grandma would tuck me in, give the door a firm push, and tell me to have sweet dreams. Of course, the door would always creep open again before she was even halfway down the stairs. I'd watch that thin line of light from the hallway, listening to the house creak and groan around me, feeling like I was in my own little fortress. One night, the storm was particularly fierce. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the window panes, and the rain was coming down in sheets. I must have been around 10 years old. I woke up suddenly, not sure what had disturbed me. The room was pitch black. The hallway light was off. The only illumination came from the occasional, brilliant flash of lightning that lit up the world outside for a split second. It was during one of these flashes that I saw it. The door was open wider than usual, about a foot. And then, I heard it over the storm, a slow, agonizing creak. The door was moving. I told myself it was just the wind. A draft must have caught it. The old house was full of drafts. I pulled the quilt up to my chin, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to will myself back to sleep, but the creaking continued. slow and deliberate. It wasn't the sound of a door being pushed by the wind. It was the sound of a door being opened with intention. Another flash of lightning lit up the room, and my breath caught in my throat. I saw a hand. It was wrapped around the edge of the door, gripping the dark wood. It was a pale, almost translucent hand, with long, thin fingers. It looked unnaturally clean, like it had been scrubbed raw. Knuckles were bony and prominent. I froze, unable to move, unable to scream. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Is it my grandma? No. Her hands were wrinkled and dotted with age spots. This hand was different. It was ageless and eerie. As I watched, paralyzed, the fingers slowly, gently curled and uncurled around the doorframe. It wasn't a threatening gesture, more like a curious one, as if it were testing the texture of the wood. The storm raged outside, but inside that room, everything was silent except for my own frantic heartbeat. Then, as slowly as it had appeared, the hand slid back out of sight, and the door drifted shut again, leaving just that familiar, frustrating crack. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just lay there, staring into the darkness where the door was, my ears straining to hear any sound over the receding storm. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. I kept expecting the hand to reappear, or for the door to swing wide open, but nothing happened. The rest of the night passed in a state of hypervigilant fear. When the first gray light of dawn finally filtered through the window, I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me sick. I waited until I heard my grandmother moving around in the kitchen downstairs before I dared to get out of bed. I didn't tell her what happened. How could I? I should say it was a nightmare, a product of the storm and an overactive imagination. I tried to convince myself of the same thing. Maybe I had dreamed it. The memory was so vivid, though. The image of that pale hand burned into my mind. I avoided the guest room for the next few nights, making excuses to sleep on the sofa in the living room. But a week later, my cousins came to visit, and the sofa was claimed. I had no choice but to go back to the guest room. I felt a knot of dread in my stomach as I got ready for bed. I tried to be brave, wedged a chair under the doorknob, hoping it would keep the door shut for good. I turned on the small bedside lamp, determined not to be in complete darkness. I lay in bed, reading a book, trying to distract myself, but my eyes kept flicking to the door. The chair was holding it shut, but I could still see the faintest shadow of a crack. I must have drifted off eventually, because the next thing I knew, the room was cold. The lamp was still on, but the light seemed dimmer, weaker. I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. The red numbers glowed, 3:17 a.m., and then I saw it. The chair I had wedged under the knob had been pushed aside, just a few inches, silently, and the door was slowly, soundlessly, opening again. This time it didn't stop at a crack. It swung open wider and wider until it was halfway open. My blood ran cold. I couldn't breathe. I was trapped. And then a face leaned into the opening. It was a man's face, but it was all wrong. The skin was a pasty, sickly gray, like old parchment. It was stretched tight over his cheekbones and jaw. His eyes were the most terrifying part. They were just dark pools, so dark they seemed to absorb the dim light from the lamp. There was no white, no iris, just endless black. He looked at me, not with malice, but with a profound and eternal sadness. His lips, thin and colorless, parted. A whisper, like the rustling of dry leaves, filled the silent room. He said, "I keep the door open, so you can hear me." I don't remember screaming. I think I was too terrified to make a sound. I scrambled out of the bed, stumbling over my own feet, and ran. I didn't stop until I burst into my grandmother's room, sobbing uncontrollably. She woke up with a start, her eyes wide with alarm, could barely get the words out between my gasps for air. I told her everything, the hand, the chair moving, the face, the whisper. I expected her to comfort me, to tell me it was just a bad dream. She didn't. She just listened, her expression growing weary and heavy. When I finally finished my frantic story, she sighed, a deep, tired sound that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. She looked at me, not with disbelief, but with a sad acceptance. She patted the bed beside her, and I crawled in, still trembling. She pulled the covers around me and said, "I know. I'm so sorry, child. She told me the story then. The room had belonged to a man who had lived in the house long before my grandparents bought it. He was a lonely man and recluse who had no family left. He had fallen ill, and he had waited day after day for a friend to come and visit him, to check on him. But no one ever came. He died alone in that room, waiting. "He still checks," my grandmother said, her voice soft and full of pity. "He checks every night, hoping someone has finally come. He leaves the door open, just in case he misses them." I never slept in that house again. My parents picked me up the next day. I couldn't even look at the guest room door as I left. For years afterward, I couldn't sleep without a light on, and I always had to make sure my bedroom door was securely locked. The image of that sad gray face and those empty eyes is something I'll never forget. And sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm alone, I can almost hear that dry, rustling whisper. I keep the door open so you can hear me. Thanks for listening to my story. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe out there,